In the quiet countryside of Franklin Township, Lenawee County, Michigan, life moves slowly. The sound of tractors, the hum of family-owned businesses, and the chatter of small-town neighbors fill the air. Everyone knows everyone. And that's exactly what makes this story so haunting. Because when Dee Ann Warner vanished from her home in April 2021, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a shock that ripped through the heart of a tight-knit community. Dee Ann was a 52-year-old mother, businesswoman, and friend to many. She wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without a trace. She was sharp, hardworking, and deeply loved her children. She owned a successful trucking and farming business, Warner Farms, and was known for being tough but kind. Those who knew her said she ran her company with the same energy she ran her life. Direct, no nonsense, and full of determination. But behind closed doors, Dee Ann's personal life was far from peaceful. She was married to Dale John Warner, a man she had built both a business and a life with. Together they managed their farm and logistics operations. On the outside, they looked like a hard-working couple living the American dream. But inside that home, things were falling apart. Friends and family noticed Dee Ann had grown withdrawn in the months before she vanished. She confided in some that she and Dale were having serious marital problems, money disputes, control issues, and emotional tension that had been boiling for years. There were even whispers that Dee Ann had been planning to leave Dale and possibly file for divorce. Then came the weekend of April 24th, 2021. That Saturday night, neighbors saw Dee Ann and Dale together at home. According to Dale, the couple argued that night, something he later admitted to investigators. He claimed Dee Ann went to bed upset, and when he woke up the next morning, she was gone. No note, no message, just gone. But when Dee Ann's daughter, Layla, came by that Sunday morning to have breakfast with her mom, something they often did, she immediately knew something was wrong. The doors were unlocked. Dee Ann's car was still there. Her phone, purse, and keys, all untouched. Even her contact lenses and makeup were left behind. There was no sign she had planned to go anywhere. Layla tried calling her mother's phone repeatedly, but every call went straight to voicemail. Hours turned into panic. She contacted family members and eventually the police. At first, authorities treated it as a routine missing person report. Maybe Dee Ann had taken some time away. Maybe she'd gone for a drive. But her family pushed back. They knew this wasn't right. Dee Ann was responsible, stable, and wouldn't just vanish without telling anyone. Days passed, then weeks, and no trace of Dee Ann emerged. No bank activity, no phone calls, no social media, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. Suspicion quickly began to grow, and all eyes turned to one man, her husband, Dale Warner. From the start, Dale's behavior raised eyebrows. He didn't seem emotional. He didn't join the search parties. And when police or reporters asked questions, his answers were often vague or inconsistent. At one point, he told investigators that Dee Ann just needed space. At another, he said she might have run off. But something about his story didn't add up. The couple's farm property, a large rural estate filled with barns, machinery, and fields, became the center of a major search operation. Volunteers, cadaver dogs, and drones combed through acres of land. They searched nearby rivers and ponds. But still, nothing. Meanwhile, friends and family began sharing disturbing details. They said Dale had been controlling, monitoring Dee Ann's phone, tracking her movements, and controlling finances. Some claimed he had isolated her from certain relatives and employees. As the investigation deepened, detectives started to suspect that this wasn't a disappearance at all, but something much darker. In June 2021, detectives returned to the Warner property for a more intensive search. They dug in specific spots, scanned with ground-penetrating radar, and took soil samples. Still, they didn't find a body. But what they did find were inconsistencies, traces of possible cleanup in one of the barns, and witnesses who recalled strange activity that weekend. According to one employee, Dale had asked certain workers not to come to the property for a few days after Dee Ann went missing. He also allegedly moved equipment around in the early morning hours, long before police arrived. Months passed. Public interest grew. True crime forums, podcasts, and local news outlets started following the case. A Facebook page, Justice for Dee Ann, was created by her family, and it quickly gained thousands of followers demanding answers. Despite mounting suspicion, prosecutors initially said there wasn't enough evidence to charge Dale with anything. Without a body, no weapon, and no direct eyewitness, they couldn't yet prove a crime had occurred. It was now classified as a no-body homicide investigation. But Dee Ann's family refused to give up. They kept pushing authorities, organizing searches, hiring private investigators, and even contacting the media. They believed that Dee Ann was no longer alive, and that her husband knew exactly what happened. Then, in 2022, a new development gave them hope. Detectives uncovered phone records and digital data suggesting Dale's timeline didn't match up with his statements. Investigators also found that some farm equipment had been moved unusually late at night on April 24th. And then came a chilling tip, one that would eventually lead to a shocking discovery. Someone claimed that Dale had access to several large metal tanks on his property, the kind used for storing fertilizer or chemicals like anhydrous ammonia. And according to that source, one of those tanks hadn't been opened or used in years. At the time, investigators couldn't confirm it. They had searched much of the property already. But as months went by, the whispers around town only grew louder. People wanted to know, where was Dee Ann Warner? And what was hiding inside that farm all this time? Months turned into years, and the search for Dee Ann Warner stretched far beyond the boundaries of Franklin Township, Michigan. Her family's heartbreak deepened with every passing day. The initial hope that she might walk back through the door began to fade, replaced by a heavier truth: that Dee Ann wasn't missing. She was gone. By 2023, her family's relentless pressure on investigators had made one thing clear: this case wasn't over. Even without a body, the Lenawee County Sheriff's Office, the Michigan State Police, and the FBI were quietly building a case. And their focus was laser-sharp: Dale John Warner. While Dale maintained that he had nothing to do with Dee Ann's disappearance, investigators began piecing together a timeline that contradicted nearly everything he said. Phone records, vehicle GPS data, and witness statements painted a very different picture. Around the time Dee Ann was last seen, late Saturday night, April 24th, 2021, Dale's phone had gone dark. Then, in the early hours of Sunday morning, it suddenly reconnected near one of his barns, a location that would later become central to the investigation. Detectives learned that Dale had been unusually active on his property that night. Heavy farm equipment, loaders, and trucks were moved around between midnight and dawn. Security cameras in the area caught glimpses of vehicle lights flickering through the fields, and yet Dale told police he had been sleeping. Employees also recalled strange behavior from Dale in the days after Dee Ann's disappearance. One worker said Dale told him not to come in for a few days because things were crazy. Another mentioned that Dale seemed more focused on cleaning the barn than searching for his missing wife. Investigators began suspecting that Dee Ann's remains were still on the property, hidden somewhere in plain sight. But despite multiple searches with cadaver dogs, radar, and drones, they came up empty. Then, in mid-2023, prosecutors decided it was time to act. On November 10, 2023, authorities arrested Dale John Warner and charged him with open murder and tampering with evidence. The news exploded across Michigan. Reporters flooded the small town, cameras rolled outside the courthouse, and for the first time, Dee Ann's family felt a measure of justice. The arrest was emotional. Dee Ann's daughter, Layla, told reporters, "We've waited so long for this. I just want to bring my mom home." But as powerful as that moment was, there was still one thing missing: Dee Ann herself. For the next year, investigators continued searching, hoping to find her remains before the trial began. They combed through fields, ponds, and even dug up parts of Dale's property that had been overlooked. Yet time after time, the searches turned up nothing. Then, in August 2024, everything changed. It was a hot, humid Michigan summer. Detectives received a confidential tip from a source who had worked with Dale on his property years earlier. The tip was simple but chilling. "Check the tanks." The source described several large steel anhydrous ammonia tanks stored in one of Dale's barns, the kind used in farming to store fertilizer. They were heavy, sealed, and rarely moved. On August 17, 2024, investigators returned to the Warner property with a search warrant. They entered the barn, surrounded by the smell of oil, metal, and rust. The tanks were lined up against a wall, thick, cylindrical, and covered in dust. One of them stood out. It had a welded end cap, sealed shut. Using industrial tools, investigators carefully opened it. Inside, they found what they had been searching for over 3 years: human remains. Forensic specialists quickly moved in. DNA testing later confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to Dee Ann Warner. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. News stations broke the story within hours. Missing Michigan woman Dee Ann Warner, found dead inside sealed tank on husband's property. The headline spread across the country. For Dee Ann's family, it was both devastating and relieving. They finally knew where she was, but the reality of how she had been hidden was unbearable. Investigators described the scene as one of the most disturbing concealment efforts they had ever encountered. Inside that tank, Dee Ann's body had been sealed in an attempt to erase her existence. It was clear to investigators that whoever placed her there had knowledge of farm equipment and chemicals. Someone who knew how to handle anhydrous tanks. Someone who knew the property intimately. All the evidence pointed back to one man: Dale Warner. Prosecutors now had the physical proof they needed. They strengthened the murder and tampering charges and prepared for trial. The remains were sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, where forensic experts worked to determine the cause of death. Although decomposition had made it difficult to identify specific injuries, investigators found enough evidence to confirm homicide. Meanwhile, Dale's defense team claimed he was innocent, that the discovery was a setup, that someone else must have placed the remains there. But the odds were against him. The tank had been on his property, sealed, and untouched for years. Only he had access. As the news spread, the community of Franklin Township held candlelight vigils for Dee Ann. Friends shared memories of her kindness, her generosity, and her laughter. They spoke about how much she loved her children, her employees, and her work. For her family, it wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about reclaiming her story, taking back her name from the man accused of silencing her. By late 2024, the prosecution began assembling a powerful case. They had the motive, marital and financial conflict. They had circumstantial evidence, behavior, movement, lies, and now they had the body. The trial date was officially set for September 2nd, 2025, expected to last through October. In court filings, prosecutors described the killing as an act of calculated control and concealment, a desperate attempt by Dale Warner to silence a woman who was ready to leave him. But even as the case headed toward trial, questions remained. How exactly did Dee Ann die? What happened inside that home on April 24th, 2021? Did anyone else help Dale move the body into the tank? And perhaps most haunting of all, how could someone hide something so horrific for so long, in the middle of a place that once represented family and work and life? As the answers began to unfold, the community waited, and Dee Ann's family vowed to see justice served, no matter how long it took. The courthouse in Lenawee County stood silent on the day the trial of Dale John Warner began. After years of waiting, searching, and crying for answers, the Warner family was finally going to face the man they believed had taken everything from them. Reporters filled the courtroom, their cameras waiting to capture a story that had haunted Michigan for more than 4 years. Dee Ann Warner's photo, her warm smile and bright eyes, was placed near the witness stand, a reminder of the woman at the center of it all. The prosecution started their case with a quiet determination. They told the jury this wasn't a story of a woman who disappeared. It was a story of control, greed, and murder. They described Dee Ann as a successful businesswoman, a loving mother, and a strong personality. Someone who refused to be dominated. But in the final months before her disappearance, she had begun planning a life without Dale. She had spoken to family members about separating her finances, about possibly leaving him for good. For Dale Warner, the prosecutors argued, that was something he could never allow. They presented phone records showing that Dee Ann's phone went silent just after midnight on April 25th, 2021. Her car never left the property. Her phone never pinged a tower again. And yet, Dale claimed he had gone to bed and didn't know when she left. He told investigators she must have walked away. But when officers searched the property, they found her purse, her keys, and her identification still inside the house. Even her glasses, something she needed every day, were still sitting on the kitchen counter. Then came the most chilling evidence: the discovery of a large steel tank buried on Dale's property years later. Inside it were the remains of Dee Ann Warner. The prosecution explained how Dale had the tools, the equipment, and the privacy to dispose of her body in a way he thought no one would ever discover. They called it a calculated attempt to erase her existence. Witnesses described the tension between the couple. Friends said Dale often belittled Dee Ann, kept track of her finances, and isolated her from others. Employees from their trucking business testified about heated arguments, one even recalling hearing shouting from their home late that night. A neighbor described seeing Dale's truck lights moving around the property at strange hours on the night she vanished. As the trial continued, Dale sat expressionless, wearing a suit but showing no emotion. His defense team argued there was no direct proof he killed his wife. No eyewitness, no weapon, and no clear time of death. They insisted that the remains found were not conclusive until DNA confirmed them, and that the state had built its case on speculation and family resentment. They claimed the marriage had problems, yes, but that did not make Dale a murderer. The defense said Dee Ann could have left on her own, that she was overwhelmed, that people misjudged her silence. But the jury could see through it. They had heard the recordings of her last messages, the emails where she expressed fear, and the testimony of her daughter who said, "My mom would never leave us like that." When the forensic expert took the stand, the courtroom went still. He explained how the decomposition, the tank's seal, and the chemicals used suggested the body had been intentionally hidden. The condition of the remains, he said, aligned with a time frame beginning the very night she disappeared. That moment sealed the truth for many sitting in the courtroom. Outside, supporters of Dee Ann's family stood with signs that read, "Justice for Dee Ann." Her siblings, who had searched fields and woods for years, wept as the evidence was laid bare. They had always believed she was close by. They just didn't know how close. The discovery of her body on the same property where she had once built her life was a cruel, final confirmation. As the case drew to a close, both sides made their final appeals. The prosecution reminded the jury that justice delayed was not justice denied. She was hidden for years, they said, but the truth could not be buried forever. The defense countered with doubt, urging the jury to see the gaps in the state's timeline. But the jury had seen the pattern of control, the lies, the false leads, and the coldness of the man at the center of it all. When the verdict was read, the courtroom air felt heavy. Guilty. The word echoed like a prayer and a punishment all at once. Dee Ann's family embraced each other, crying quietly, their years of struggle finally finding an end. Dale Warner sat still, his jaw tight, staring at the table as if the reality hadn't reached him yet. In the days that followed, the small community of Franklin Township reflected on what had happened in their midst. People spoke of Dee Ann's kindness, her laughter, her drive to help others. They remembered the woman she had been before her life was taken, a mother, a businesswoman, a sister, a friend. Her story became a reminder of how even in the darkest secrets, truth finds a way to surface. The property where she lived and died now stands as both a memorial and a warning. For the Warner family, justice came late, but not too late. They continue to speak her name, to keep her memory alive, and to fight for victims whose voices were stolen. In the quiet fields of Michigan, the echoes of her story still linger, not as a tale of death, but as a testament to love, courage, and the